So Pivot TV and the National Association for Media Literacy Education are co-sponsoring this screening. Pivot TV is a new network that has emerged from Participant Media. They are the producers of films such as The Help and Food Inc. You might have seen some of those. And they're very much into audience engagement in important issues. So this film, This is Media, is a short documentary that was designed to spark a conversation about digital and media literacy, which is the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, and create media across media forms. And the question that Pivot wants you to think about, and that I want you to think about, is what skills and knowledge do we need to read, filter, curate, and use all of the media that are available on our screens and at our fingertips? So while we're watching this film, I have two graduate assistants in the back, Melissa McHugh, thanks for coming, and Jillian Bone. Jillian will be collecting quotes from the discussion that follows the screening, and Melissa will be live tweeting the event. We will discuss, and I encourage you to reflect on your own media usage as well as we watch the film. So, Anne, if you could just wave your hand when I'm reading your bio, that would be great. Our first panelist is Dr. Haines. He's a professor of communication and media in Montclair State University's new School of Communication and Media. He headed the task force that established the school's curriculum and the organizational structure. As a reporter, he's covered state and city politics and the crime beat. He's written extensively on media representations of the Vietnam War and Vietnam veterans. Thanks for coming, Harry. Our next panelist is Rhys Daunic. He's the founder of the Media Spot, and he works with New York City Public Schools to incorporate production-based media literacy education into existing curricula. His reflections on his work can be found in the Journal of Media Literacy Education and the recent collection of essays, Media Literacy Education in Action. Rhys also teaches courses at Columbia Teachers College and is on staff at the Summer Institute in Digital Literacy at the University of Rhode Island. He's also a board director for namely the National Association for Media Literacy Education, and you can find process-focused videos and other professional development resources Rhys has produced on his website, which is themediaspot.org. Thanks for coming, Rhys. We also have Dacey. You can guess which one is Charity. She's the Director of Teacher Ed Admissions and Retention here at Montclair State University. She earned a Bachelor of Arts in American Studies and a Master of Science in Organizational Leadership. After starting her career in education as a public high school special educator, Charity worked to recruit and develop new teachers in New York City and Prince George's County, Maryland. She's currently pursuing doctoral studies in the teacher education and teacher development program here at Montclair State University. Her research interests focus on measures of teacher quality as indicated by initial admission criteria, differential theoretical approaches to assessment of learning, and new technologies as they apply to K-12 classroom teaching. Ms. Dacey has worked to develop ethical standards for professional teaching and learning communities, and establish guidelines for appropriate internet etiquette for both undergraduate and graduate future teachers. So thank you, Charity, for joining us on the panel. And last, but certainly not least, is Gregg Festa. He is the former director of the ADP Center for Teacher Preparation and Learning Technologies here at Montclair State University. He was among those named to Technology and Learning Magazine's list of the 10 most influential people in educational technology for the year 2011. And he was selected by Technology and Learning Magazine's readers and advisors, showcasing the power of technology to transform learning. So thank you, Gregg, for joining us. So the first question I'd like to pose to the panel is what was one quote or idea that resonated with you from the film, and why did it resonate? So whoever would like to start with that. The mic, we have one mic, so you have to.
So I like the leaving and getting some other resources and bringing it back. And I think about my students as those bees. But mostly, right now, I think of my students in my school mostly as consumers and not creators of the content that's being fed to that hive.
I like the way that the filmmakers made themselves transparent as producers, as their theme for the film. I think that's effective in two ways. One is that they use that to connect themselves to us as producers. They pull back the curtain and they offer you a look at who they are as producers to a degree. And so that helps us bridge ourselves as producers, as well as the same process that media producers go through through mass media channels that are often cloaked and really difficult to decode. So they bridge both of those different types of production by pulling back the curtain on their own. And I think the other part of that I like is what they say, we're going to show you who's making this, how roles are being arranged, and who may be looking over your shoulder. But then they say it's not that simple. And so even though they're trying to expose their thinking behind the creation of this message, it's still complex. You still don't know how that's going to play to different audiences and what their exact point of view was, and all the different manipulative things that all of us do as media creators do. You need media literacy education to be able to decode those things, and it's not just by understanding that there's an author behind it isn't the whole process.
Yeah, I'm going to cheat and identify two things. One, we're paying with privacy, and I think we all need to be aware of that. We really are the product a lot of the time when it comes to the internet. And then the other thing that drew my attention was the extent to which digital media make it possible for very foolish ideas to gain traction. And we saw a really good example of that here, where the film itself equated a scientific position, namely global warming or climate change, or whatever the slogan of the day might be, with a completely unscientific position, as if they were equal, as if these positions were equal. And of course they aren't. One of my biggest complaints with the way in which this technology is developing is the extent to which foolish ideas tend to get some traction, and from time to time are actually equated with the best knowledge that we have. So that stuck in my head.
In addition, I guess the one idea that I think is interesting is not just as a consumer, but as we all navigate this new world, just this idea of nonstop activity, that it's somewhat hard to hear amidst the noise, and it's easier to tune out in a digital age. And I think that resonates, with me as a user as well. I think it's something we're all going to have to grapple with as we navigate how to move forward and how to find a way to help K-12 students do the same effectively.
What about Charity and your work with preparing teachers? So can you say a little bit more about how that, from your vantage point, what our teacher candidates need to know?
The message was definitely in the documentary that we all are responsible for what we share. So that came through really strongly. And I think that's always been the case. So we have a few more mediums here now to contend with, but that's always been the reality. That said, I just feel like we have to be really careful and look at the research as it unfolds in this area, because there's so much going on, and it is going at a pretty fast pace. I mean, on the very basic level, we hear the stories all the time with Facebook, that it's not just about friending your students, it's about things that you post, you know, intentionally on a bad day. And, you know, we've all had bad days and we've all made mistakes, so now they're forever out there. And that's the piece that I think we all really have to grapple with, because, you know, 30 years ago, if you said something, some of the same things that people are saying on Facebook, no one would ever hear. Like, if the tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it matter? But now, there's that permanent imprint of the tree landing in the forest. So, and there's ears everywhere. So that's one of the things that I think is probably one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, and I think that not just the teacher candidates, but the teachers themselves, right, as they move to a more digital version of schooling, have to be better curators of the content that they select to use with their students, especially in subject areas where there's a lot of discourse around, you know, for example, you know, the climate change example is a perfect example of that, right? So, you know, what resources, which content does the teacher select to use with their students to begin that process of critical thinking? And then there's the whole aspect of actually teaching the students to critically think about those that content or those resources to make better decisions about what's valid and what's not valid. So there's opportunity. It's sort of a double-edged sword, right? There's opportunity, but then there's also, you know, potential. There's also the potential downside as well. So, you know, shaping our teachers in a way that they're prepared to do those kinds of things as they move into the emerging digital schools that we're working in now.
Just one more point there. I would just say that if you go to a higher level than the professional etiquette, there's also the piece about teachers modeling how to best verify information. And as the internet is such a source of unverified information, as the theme emerged in this documentary, I do think it's interesting to really grapple with this notion of teachers being professional sources of information for students. So there's that piece, and then there's also this idea that children construct their identities now with this added layer of the internet, and how as teachers, when students are in those developmental years, I mean, it's so important in identity formation to be able to help students navigate that. And how do you do this in a context of this outside source? And, you know, it's not just parents' responsibility. Yeah. Yeah.
So Harry, I'm going to pick on you for a minute. So you, in the School of Communication, you pretty much prepare media producers and critics and the study of media. How do you frame these issues of curation and issues of privacy? I mean, how do you prepare communication professionals for the other side of this coin?
One of the things that we think is absolutely essential for responsible professional existence in this new environment is to understand that whatever gets produced, whatever gets distributed, is going to have some unknown impact on somebody. And for that reason, communication professionals, media professionals, need to understand the research that is done on media effects. The question of identity formation is absolutely crucial because not only children are undergoing the development of their identities, everybody else is too. And media content has impact on that. One of the thrilling things, and from my point of view, the single most thrilling thing about the development of this technology is that what we have in place right now is a global communication grid that is digital, that is available all the time, that is increasingly sophisticated, highly interactive. The difference between producer and consumer, as was pointed out here, is now thoroughly blurred forevermore. And what that suggests is that we're going to see some very dramatic changes, political changes, economic changes, cultural changes, certainly. And exactly what those changes are going to be, we do not know. They can't be predicted. But we can say with great certainty, based upon what happened in Europe as a result of the development of the printing press, those changes will be very, very dramatic. And teachers, including university professors, are implicated in that process. We have to be ready for what those changes are. I'm a great believer in the writings of Marshall McLuhan. I'm more than happy to encourage aspiring teachers to read McLuhan. He's not old-fashioned at all. In fact, if he were alive today, he'd be one of the major writers on what's happening to us. We're experiencing a cultural shift, and we're probably moving toward a global cultural formation. And that's one of the ideas we try to plant in the consciousness of our aspiring media professionals.
Yeah, I would just add on, bridging these two ideas, that our role as educators is to build the skills within students so that because they're going to be the influencers of this next wave of development. They'll create the next Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, and it's important that they do that with these critical thinking skills in mind, that they that they push these media so that, like the director of terms and condition may apply was saying, if you don't like the rules of the game, maybe he's saying maybe those technologies might not need to exist. More realistically, that might be maybe we don't need to participate in that, and we can start our own path with rules that we feel are more ethical. So building those exercises in that thinking process into students' experience, and then making sure that the type of communication that's going on, you can embrace the way that they are, inarguably drawn to this type of communication, but then bridge that experience and the social media experience with traditional educational, deeper thinking and sustained thinking on certain ideas. So that's a big challenge to bridge those two. But I think that's what we're facing as educators.
So I think maybe this is a good segue to, was there anything in the film that maybe you disagreed with or that you feel like needs to be recontextualized?
There was a statistic that I found intriguing. I just question it only because I feel like it needs to be contextualized when they quoted that 80% of young people don't really know who to trust. Because I feel that I don't know if that's situated only in now, or how do I compare that to young people in 1950 or young people in 1920? Because I feel like part of the developmental process amongst young people is to question a lot, and that to me is intertwined with that notion of trustworthiness, and you grapple with authority and all sorts of issues at that stage. So I just question that piece.
That reminds me of a study. It kind of reminds me of a study, Vanessa, you probably remember this, is a few years back now, that they did they asked, I forget how many fifth graders, a question, and when you have a question, where's the first place that you go? And they gave them the option was, mom and dad, your teacher, librarian, and the internet. And the internet ran away with it. First place, which I thought was really interesting, because I'm a father of 3, and I see that in my own house. It's more specifically YouTube now, but it's a little bit scary. And one of the things I was thinking about, you guys were talking, was and I'm doing this in my own school, is like reimagining the role of the librarian, right? So less of a gatekeeper of information and more of the teacher of critical thinking and media literacy, and to not just the students but also the teachers. you know, and I'm fortunate to have a great librarian who's already has that vision and is just now being enabled to do that kind of work.
That's good, because this video will go on the web, and your librarian will probably watch it. That was a good Adam.
Can I add
Yes.
to that just a minute? Well, you know, we talked about skepticism, and we're all in that business. We all try to foster skepticism in young people, right? It's part of critical thinking. It's good to be skeptical, but the point at which skepticism falls into cynicism, then we got problems. You know, if you're so skeptical based upon your use of a particular technology that you become cynical about all the information that comes your way, then we got problems with that. So it seems to me that media literacy then becomes very important because your skepticism ought to be strategic. It needs to be well managed so that it doesn't get the best of you.
I'll read a quote from Popova, the social media giant that was interviewed. She said, "Most things we do as humans are to get a sense that we matter. There are hardly more intoxicating sense that you matter than having changed someone's perception of the world even a little bit." So I would say, I felt like that was a point that needs a bigger discussion, because it is rewarding, and that's why the numbers of users, I think, are so high, because of that feeling you get when you're interacting, you get liked or you get retweeted or shared. But we get that feeling with so little investment sometimes on the internet, like the Reddit situation, or what she alluded to, where you sometimes you'll share something that you didn't even read just to appear to have this cultural cachet or something like that. But there's this thin layer where if the investment is so low, what is that taking away from our personal interactions? If we can satisfy the need to feel like we matter by being liked on Facebook, are we not doing the things that we used to do, interpersonally with people to get that feeling? And does our world become a little bit thin? Do our conversations become thin, and what our cultural, conversation is?
So one of the things I thought was missing was the impact, and again, I take the perspective of looking at children, specifically teens, being a high school principal, on students' health. The intoxicating nature of the internet and social media especially tends to keep them up very late at night, and is resulting in mental illness, depression, lack of sleep, causes a lot of other ailments, unintended consequences of being engaged, maybe overly engaged. So there certainly is part of media literacy, I think, has to be balance, right, of the virtual and the physical space, and your health within it. Skepticism also, over skepticism leads to depression as well. And then also feelings of isolation. Some of my students are so connected they feel isolated. So.
Yeah, can I add to that? This is fun, handing this microphone, but we're all getting our exercise today. A lot of research was done in the early days of television on this very thing, the impact of television viewing on children, and it was real. It was real. But my generation was the first generation growing up watching television, and there were times when my parents just had to pick me up and throw me outside. But the big difference between this technology and that technology is the interactivity. And it's the interactivity that makes this new technology so seductive, and it is. I love talking to students here at Montclair State about the seduction of this new equipment. Even the physical equipment itself feels good. It's manufactured to be very inviting. And once you fall into that digital domain and you realize what you have, you can cruise the globe if you know what you're doing, and it doesn't take much. And in addition to that, you can post your ideas no matter how silly or foolish they might be. You can communicate with people all over the world. I mean, why wouldn't a 12-year-old kid want to stay at the screen? Or a 68-year-old. Or 43.
So one of the quotes was, yeah, go ahead.
Can we interact?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
There's a Twitter feed.
I'll show you that. You guys talk a lot about skepticism and how it's good to be checking your sources but not overly checking. How do you find this balance between what you think should be a reliable source, like even if I'm reading The Guardian versus watching Fox News, there's this both claim to be or should be good, reputable sources of information, but there's biases on either side. Like, how do you deal with that as either a student or teacher or just like human being taking in information?
That's why I love Wikipedia. It's a controversial thing for an educator to say, especially a principal. But my teachers are always like, oh, Wikipedia, don't bring that into my classroom. It's not valid information. And it might not be, and it might be, right? But it's a great sort of lesson for students, especially if you scroll all the way down and see the sources.
Right.
So, I think crowdsourcing information, I guess Reddit is probably a good example of that. It can go right, it can go wrong, but I think, and I don't know the data on this, maybe you guys do, but my guess is that crowdsourcing, somebody, I think Wikipedia is something like 90% accurate. Forget what it is, which is actually pretty good. And it actually is, from what I understand, it's more accurate than like Encyclopedia Britannica was at its height of popularity. And that's all through crowdsourcing. So I think that's one way that you can filter and help form your own opinion about what's fact and what's fiction.
I think cultivating your own, if you cultivate a certain number of sources, like not just having one trusted source in news, but cultivating a few, and then understanding what bubble you're in. Like, am I in an echo chamber that is always giving me back what I want to hear, and trying to decode that bias a little bit, understanding that everybody has one.
The National Association for Media Literacy Education at namely.net, they have some key questions to ask, which Gregg talked about. What is the source? But most importantly, I think at the core of being media literate is more than just asking what is the source, but how do you know that that's a source? Like, how do you know that? And so it's not enough just to ask questions about who produced it, who is represented, who is not represented, but following up with, how do you know that? And that's where the evidence comes in. So source citations in Wikipedia, knowing, even knowing Pivot TV, it's important to know what's in Participant Media, the parent organization, what's in their catalog of films that they do, what is their bias. They're very open about their in citizen engagement, right? But it's how do you know? So it's not just inquiry for inquiry's sake, but it's inquiry that's based on evidence. And therefore, you have to be an effective gatherer of that evidence.
And one of the skills that we teach our students in our school is, I always refer to it as the basic search, but it's really advanced search. If you go to most search engines and you click on advanced search, it's usually hidden now because they don't really want you to go there. But it allows you to really specify the parameters of your search. So really plan out and think through your search so that you're not just getting fed what the engine, the database behind the engine wants you to get, such as parsing out which domains you want. So if you're looking for specific data sets and you know that the government collects certain data sets, you can search by .gov and eliminate all of your other resources from those results. So there's, I always call it basic search for our students because that's really where to go to parse out, all that kind of stuff. But if you look at the advanced search and most search tools, you'll be able to get to that.
And this opens up a new market too for verification. The Pointer Institute just came out with something called the Verification Handbook. and it's at verificationhandbook.com. But it's originally intended for journalists, but it's a free downloadable publication. But if you think about students wanting to analyze the news, that kind of verification handbook allows journalists and students to verify sources during emergency or breaking news. So in the case of the Reddit story where the wrong suspect was, or the person was identified, those occasions are time to say, well, how do I know that this is valid? So a lot of it is asking the question at the right time, right, when it's high stakes.
I think it's funny that Reddit keeps bringing, because Reddit just, I think they kind of broke the hijacking flight case 2 nights ago, because subreddit aviation, they heard the code over the public channels that you can listen to aviation code on, and they were the first one before any other major news outlet broke that a plane had been hijacked.
Interesting.
Just kind of going with the research angle in that regard, I think to your point earlier, there's some exciting probably changes ahead, even in the realm of research, only because I feel like tools like Google Scholar, for instance, as a student, I think are very valuable and connect us so much more quickly to studies, empirical studies out there that you used to have to walk down to the library and request and do interlibrary alone, and now you can get access to those things so much more quickly. So I foresee hopefully the turnaround time on research studies decreasing because of the connectivity piece.
Thanks very much. Another person whose work I can recommend, because I think it's right on target for aspiring teachers, and that would be Wilson Dizard, D-I-Z-Z-A-R-D, Dizard. And Dizard has written extensively on technology, and he also deals with a variety of knowledges and what constitutes credibility within the new digital environment. And I think this gets to the question that you raised. I think more and more, those of us who are privileged to teach young people, we need to focus on what constitutes credibility. What are the elements of being a credible source? I think it's very important for young people, especially, to pick up on that and to learn that. Because of course not all sources are credible. And this is where journalists do have the inside track, I think, as a professional group. Because if you're a journalist and you can't smoke out sources that have no credibility at all, you're in trouble. You're in big trouble.
So I think that one of the last questions I think is just it's a very broad question, but what is the implication then for the online lives of our students? So each of you have stewardship over groups of students, groups of young people. What are the implications based on what we've seen in the documentary? How would you counsel them?
So, unfortunately, we can only teach in the here and now, and I think Harry, you alluded to the idea that the changes are so rapid. I think you compared it to the Gutenberg press. They're so rapid now that it's tough to even say what next year's going to look like. And one of the things I was thinking about as you guys were talking just now is how video is changed school. Like that was the big thing. Like I knew video was the killer app, YouTube and all of that, Khan Academy and stuff from an instructional perspective. But if you think about like Google Glass, right? And so now you not only have the ability to look at something and get data and information about it, but you can also just video everything in real time and be sharing and streaming that in real time. And it's like, how do you prepare for a world like that? How do you prepare a student for a world like that? It's hard to conceive what that would look like. Although it's knocking on our door, they're here, they're now, they're expensive, and they're not mainstream yet, but they will be soon. And how do we educate for that kind of a world? And that's a vastly different world than just the internet world. The internet world of a lot of text and images. It's really just a whole other level even social media for that matter. So I don't know the answer to that question, other than to say that we can only prepare our students for life in the here and now.
Jump on for a second.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You good?
Sure. Work practices need to evolve with the technology, and I'm sure all of my colleagues up here would agree with that. I think it's absolutely essential for teachers. Your work practices have got to take into consideration the rapid evolution of these technologies, because whether we like it or not, believe me, I experience this most of the time when I walk into a lecture hall. We're competing with these technologies, and the extent to which we're able to adapt these technologies to our teaching practice, I think will have a lot to say about how successful we are as in preparing young people for this new simulated environment, which increasingly they live in. I had a chat a couple of years ago with an art historian who predicted that eventually we'll be developing simulations of very famous artworks, so that sometime down the road, students will actually walk into paintings. Students will actually walk in, if they're out in Iowa City, they will walk into the simulated environment of the Sistine Chapel. And this is not outrageous. This is not falling off the cliff into science fiction. I think many of the aspiring teachers at Montclair State University who are now in their 20s are probably going to live long enough to see something like that happen. And that is going to change the teaching practice.
I think students are in a much more complex world, as they point out in the film, and they need to be aware. I think it's a great place for them to start with self-knowledge of us as producers. We're all producers now, and we need to be aware of the biases of the tools that we're using, and also the structures that we're interacting with. Who makes the software that we're using? Why is it free if it's free? Who's benefiting from it if it's not? And then what are the biases of the platforms that we're putting our messages out onto? So it's sort of up to both of us as educators, hopefully, to create the environment in schools where students are learning about how to bridge traditional education with the real world landscape that they're interacting in, and then students themselves working to bridge that alongside the educators.
I was thinking a little bit about the statistic that current kindergarten students will retire in the year 2080. And for the teachers who are entering the classroom currently, who will be teaching kindergartners over the next few years, just the dramatic change that you referenced earlier, I really do still feel that John Goodlaud, who is a lot of the force behind the agenda for education and democracy, part of the philosophy of Montclair, will still apply in 2080, in the sense that every time a teacher steps into a classroom, it's first and foremost about making a connection with a student. So even if they don't step physically into a classroom, but they're having a class electronically, I still feel that technology is a tool that is in the hands of the teacher, and that teacher ultimately still has the power to use that tool as she or he chooses. So when I think about democracy and the media and the internet broadening the possibilities for democracy, giving everybody access, there's a lot of potential there to level the playing field in terms of educational access. But again, that comes with a responsibility that I think is somewhat more daunting than it's been in the past, only because at least the agenda for education and democracy posits that really it's about restoring a shared humanity to the educational process. And that's a bigger responsibility even than probably all of the accountability initiatives right now, because it's still about that human connection with each and every child and being able to differentiate and adapt instruction to a broad base of student needs. And so I think this is gonna be interesting because we still need caring, compassionate people with integrity who focus on freedom and dignity and responsibility. And that at the end of the day is what creates teacher quality. And if we're talking about quality, we really need better tools to reach broader markets. And so the media outlets that we have now, while they do create more noise, they do create more possibility if we do this well and thoughtfully and purposefully. So I'm pretty hopeful because I see my students really outpacing myself already. And I hope for my children's sake that they continue to do that, because my kindergartner will be that retiree in 2080, and I think she'll be way more prepared than I ever was if we do this well.
I agree, and I'd just like to add, and I mentioned this earlier, but I think that we have to, as educators, make sure that our students are not just consumers, but are also builders, producers, and within the context of this film, and give them the foundational skills to build in the digital world. And I think that really will be the leveling of the playing field if we're able to do that.
So I guess we can ask the question of, does Facebook make you a more caring and compassionate individual? Right? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I'd like to thank our panelists, Harry, Rhys, Charity, and Gregg, for engaging in this brief discussion about this film. I'd also like to encourage you to go to pivot.tv and explore their network, as well as some of the films that they have available, and the National Association for Media Literacy Education, which is the body that put out the core principles of media literacy, and familiarize yourself with those. There is currently an effort in New Jersey to make media literacy education a required component of all schools. And so that is gaining traction in the legislature, and we're hoping that that will come to pass soon. So thank you again, and